Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be going over the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Today, talking about Chapter 4, The Man Who Didn't Look Right. This is part of a section finally getting into the meat of the book, and this section is titled The First Law, which is Make It Obvious. We spoke about this law, or got an introduction to this law, in the previous video that I did on Chapter 3. And in that chapter, we basically talked about the 4 steps to how a habit works. We talked about the cue. First, you have a cue that initiates the behavior. Then you have a craving. That's the motivation behind wanting to do the behavior. Then you have the response. So the behavior that is actually coming to light, that you're actually doing. And then you have the reward at the end of it, the thing that you get for doing the behavior. And then we talked about the 4 laws to a habit. So we talked about how you want to make it obvious, you want to make it attractive, you want to make it easy, and you want to make it satisfying. And each one of those represents the step in the habit formation pattern, the 4-step pattern of cue, craving, response, reward. So that was last time. Today, we are diving into the first law on making it obvious. This will be a little bit of a short chapter for us, but James Clear starts off this chapter talking about people's intuition. So he gives a couple examples, anecdotes here of he had heard a story of a woman who one day just calls out that her father doesn't look right. And it turns out that he ended up having an artery blocked and he could have had a heart attack. And she just knew this by the way he looked when she looked right at his face. She knew that something was wrong. Another example, and he gives a few more, but another example was a commander in the Gulf War who correctly identified an incoming missile on radar, even though on radar things just kind of tend to look the same. You know, radar blips, you can't tell if it's a missile or another ship or a plane, etc. And he correctly identified an incoming missile, and he knew that it wasn't one of their own planes, and he successfully, stopped that attack, saved some people. But James talks about how the human brain is a prediction machine. It's going to sort through all the details that come in, and it's going to highlight only the important ones for future use. This is similar to what we talked about with Winning in Mind and the subconscious mind. When you practice so much, you get things to be automatic that they really don't require your conscious mind to think about it. It goes into your subconscious mind, and then you utilize that in the field of play. It's kind of what he's saying here. That's kind of what James is getting at here, is that you do something so often that it just becomes habit. And that's really what we're talking about here on Atomic Habits. Your body autopilots a ton of stuff. You're autopiloting breathing, you're autopiloting hunger. And habits are going to work in that same fashion. But you have to be careful because that can work against you as well. So just as positive habits, you can get them down. You do something so automatic and it runs every time you get into a certain cue or something is queued up for you. Remember, hearkening back to chapter 3. And it's a positive habit, or it's a habit that benefits you. That's great. But what if it's a habit that does not benefit you? It works in the same way. So you can have an automatic response and generate a negative habit or a bad habit. Or you can have it work for you in the positive direction. So he had this quote from Carl Jung who said, "Make the unconscious thoughts conscious or they will run your world." And we're going to get into this in the next slide on the habits scorecard. Now, what exactly is this habit scorecard? Well, another little bit of an anecdote here. James talks about the Japanese railway system. And if you've never been on the Japanese railway system, apparently they started doing something that was very unique, some procedures that were very unique. And it was called point and call. Basically, what this was any process that is done in the running of the train, they point and call it out. So whether you are turning the train on, it's not exactly like turning on a car, but if you are getting the train started to run, you would say, getting train started to run, 0700. And you would call out your action. If you were, getting passengers, ticketing passengers to get onto the train, maybe you'd call that out too. You'd call out passengers who were still boarding the train. You would call out pretty much everything in the process of getting that train to the next destination. So essentially, you're doing a running commentary on your work for that day. And this did something staggering. It actually reduced errors when running the train. Reduced errors and mishaps because you are explicitly stating every detail about the train. And again, I have some other examples there. I forgot about these. You're saying when the time it leaves, you're saying the speed, you're calling out when the signal is green or when the tracks change, etc. You're calling it out and you're bringing it into the conscious mind to make everybody else aware of what's happening. And then you could maybe assess if something doesn't go bad. So if you do call something out that doesn't align with maybe what everybody else knows, because you're verbalizing, you're calling it out so everybody else could hear, maybe somebody else can catch on to it and say, oh, actually, that's not right. That's not right. We don't turn on the train that way, or the tracks shouldn't be changed right there. So it reduces errors and cuts accidents. It was brought over, I think, to America as well, he was saying. And again, here in America, they had success with it as well. He gave statistics, and the statistics were really good. So it reduces errors by up to 85%, cuts accidents by 30%. They brought it into New York City. Incidents of incorrectly berthed subways fell 57%. So a really, really good system. Really good system. And it essentially, this is what I kind of meant to say here, is that it raises awareness for something before it truly derails. No pun intended there with the train analogy, but you're calling something out so that you can assess if it's the right thing to do. And calling it out, verbalizing it, not only for you, but I think for other people too. Other people can check you on it. But you can check yourself on it if you verbalize it out there into the world. You can kind of step back and say, actually, wait, is the thing that I just said what's supposed to happen? So James goes on to say, and this is leading into the scorecard, is that many failures or bad habits can be attributed to a lack of self-awareness. So remember what I was saying in the previous slide, how you can automatize things so well that they just run in the background. Well, you could have a bad habit, a habit that starts out and just gets automatically done every time you come into that situation. Maybe you don't even realize it, but as an example, maybe you always pull out a cigarette every time you're standing alone, right? And it's just automatic for you, which is a negative habit, a habit that does not benefit you. So your lack of self-awareness is going to lead to those bad habits. Just keep automatically running. Every time I'm alone, I don't have anything to do, I'll pull out the cigarette. At least I have something to do. This is just stems from a lack of self-awareness. Things can be so automatic that we overlook these bad habits. We don't question if it's something right or wrong. And by calling it out, by pointing and calling it out, we can actually nip these bad habits in the bud. Next slide. So they can sneak up on us, but when we point and call it out, we can take a step to reduce those bad habits. So the habits scorecard is where you make a list of all the stuff that you do throughout a day, all those habits, like whether it's, hey, I get up in the morning, I make a cup of coffee, I read for 15 minutes always in the morning, I watch TV for an hour, I'm on my phone, etc. You make a list of it, and then you go through the list and you ask yourself, is this a good, bad, or neutral habit? And it's kind of a loaded term because James says that there's really no good or bad habits. There's only habits that benefit you or habits that don't. Because good and bad can kind of be objective a little bit, because maybe something that's bad for you could be good for somebody else. He uses an example of, I eat like 2 bagels with peanut butter and a glass of milk every morning with eggs. If you're somebody who's overweight, yeah, that's probably not a good habit for you. But if you're somebody who's a bodybuilder and needs to get in their calories and protein before a workout, that's probably a good habit for you. So you should actually ask yourself whether this habit is beneficial to you or not beneficial to you, is probably like a better question to ask, he says. So if you can answer those questions for each habit in your list, if it's something that's beneficial to you, you put a plus next to it. If it's not beneficial, detrimental, you put a minus, or if it's neutral, you put an equal sign. So you're categorizing it based on how it's going to benefit you. You're essentially asking yourself, another way to ask this question of each habit is, does this behavior help me become the type of person I wish to be? Again, going back to the previous chapter where we said goals and habits should be identity-based, not outcome-based, because they're going to stick better if they match up, if they align with your identity. Does it move you closer to your desired identity? And while you're going through your list, you just want to acknowledge it. You don't want to judge. You don't want to go through your list and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I suck this bad. Just go through it. Don't judge yourself. But you go through it and you speak out the bad habits. Essentially, this is calling out the bad habits that you do, so that next time you go to do them, you think about this list. And then maybe you can cut them out. And maybe you can stop doing it. Because James says at the end of the day, behavior change starts with awareness. That's kind of what we talked about in the last chapter, what I mentioned earlier here about the cue. That's the thing that initiates the behavior. And you need some sort of awareness to do that behavior. And you need some sort of awareness to stop behaviors that are not beneficial in your life. So, to summarize, your brain subconsciously picks up and does certain habits after a stimulus response. So it picks up on a cue and it eventually does the response. The cue phase is the thing that initiates the behavior. Then you crave the thing at the end of the behavior. Then you actually do the behavior. Then you get your reward. So your brain can pick up on certain things, and it does certain habits after a stimulus response. Is it good? Yes. Sometimes it's very good, but also sometimes it can work against you. Once we automatize those certain actions, we then stop paying attention to them. So a good thing to raise awareness and stop any habits that are not beneficial to you is to point and call it out. And we can do that using the habit scorecard by, again, listing out all the habits that you do throughout the day, putting a plus or a minus or an equal sign on whether it's beneficial to you, not beneficial to you, or if it's neutral. Or if you want to look at it another way, do these benefits align with the person I want to be or not? And then you see any of them that you put a minus next to, and now you know that, hey, these habits don't align with who I want to be. You've essentially pointed and called it out, so that next time you go to do it, you're more aware of it, and maybe you can stop yourself from participating in that particular behavior. And that's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next time. I might do another JavaScript video maybe next time or coming up soon. Next time we're going to continue down this Q phase, the first law of habit change, this make it obvious law, and we're going to continue on with that. Take a listen to the podcast. Just had the most downloads in the history of the podcast just this month, which is crazy, and thank you guys so much for listening. For all the software developers out there, I interviewed Uncle Bob Martin, the guy who wrote the books Clean Code and the Clean Coder that we went through and we had videos on this channel. Yeah, I interviewed him, and that was a really fun interview. He's a really nice guy. Good insights from him. So check that out. And guys, again, thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next time. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash.